was a high school teacher in Winter Park, Florida, and there was a break. It was lunchtime. It was around lunchtime, and I stepped outside my office. In Florida, of course, we have short buildings because of the sinkholes, and so I had an outside door to my office. I just stepped out for some fresh air, and a number of female students came by, weeping, and I didn't know. I couldn't figure out why this huge number of girls were weeping, and so I ran across the sidewalk to the business office of the school. I said, "What? Something happened?" They said, "Kennedy's been shot." And we called for the school buses, closed the school, and everybody went home.
Wow. Thank you for sharing.
Yes, my name is Frank Jandrowitz. At the time, I was a young Army intelligence officer, and I was standing outside the headquarters, and all of a sudden, all hell broke out because we were a STRAC outfit, supposed to be on 12 hours ready to go, and we got ready to go.
Well, just for the unit, I'll make sure
Thank you.
my name tag is on. Thank you for that. Personally, 3rd grade, announcement was made. Everybody dropped to their knees. Never forget, the television wheeled into the room. On was the image of somebody telling us what happened. We had no idea what it meant. It's probably the first time I saw my parents cry. We have Bob Rayner from the editorial department. It's his first memory on Earth at 3 years old. So we have all these stories to tell, and that's one reason why we've devoted this space to this unusual story. And on Sunday, in the Times-Dispatch, staff writer Markus Schmidt and staff photographer Dean Hoffmeyer will present a special section 50 years later on their recent trip to Dallas, where they probed as to what those 5 decades will mean. They spent the whole day there recounting what happened on November 22nd, 1963. They'll be back later on to talk about that. I appreciate you reporting and eager to hear about that. But there's been so many books written about this, so many conspiracies, and that's why Dr. Larry Sabato from the University of Virginia here. Now, you know him as one of the nation's top political analysts, and from his perch as the director of the University of Virginia Center for Politics, but he's not here to talk about politics or what happened in the last election. We got that right?
You're absolutely right.
Thank you very much.
Not going to talk about it.
Probably in his contract, and for good reason. But he's here tonight because of his New York Times bestseller book, The Kennedy Half Century. And in it, Dr. Sabato tells the story of that fateful day in Dallas, explores numerous conspiracy theories, and debunks the conclusion by the House Select Committee on Assassination that a 4th shot was fired, which would have meant, in the book, Dr. Sabato also explores JFK's impact on the presidents that came after him and how they used him to sell their own political agendas. And we've invited him here tonight on a special program of the Public Square to talk about what he revealed in the book about that 4th shot, and what he'll argue is that the killing of Kennedy was inevitable and could have happened anywhere. So the first part of our program is Dr. Sabato, followed by the dynamic duo of Markus Schmidt and Dean Hoffmeyer. Dr. Sabato, thank you for being here. It's all yours.
You want me to go to the podium?
Yes, sir.
All right.
You can go anywhere you want.
Terrific. Tom, thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be here with all of you tonight. And I want to start out by saying you've got a real treat coming on Sunday. I've just had a chance to look through this, and it is a terrific special section. And Markus Schmidt and Dean Hoffmeyer did a wonderful job. I was down with them at the same time in Dallas. I tried to avoid them because they were working so hard. And, that's not what we do in academia. We sit back and think about things. But they had to hustle, But I was delighted. I've been in Dallas as much as I've been in Virginia for the last 5 years. I've been working on this project for 5 years. I've been thinking about it since 1963. And I was very happy to be able to steer them to some of the more interesting people that I've met in those 5 years. I don't want to say I've interviewed everybody, but I've sure interviewed a lot of the living people who were in Dealey Plaza as well as survivors of the Kennedy White House and so on and so forth. But the Dallas thing has always interested me, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. But this is really fascinating, and they reached people that I felt were telling the truth, telling the honest truth. The problem with this is, well, first of all, it's 50 years old. Second problem is that you can divide the witnesses and the key players into two groups. One group has been interested all along in just telling what they know and not embellishing and not charging for the information. And then there's another group that has embellished and consistently raised the prices. And that includes Maureen Oswald. Let me name her. She took after Oswald's mother, Marguerite, who almost immediately started charging for information. Pretty shocking. When you learn what I've learned about Marguerite Oswald, you understand Lee Harvey Oswald and why he did what he did. And yes, he's guilty. I'm just going to give you a little glimpse into the conclusion. I'm stunned and more than a little disgusted by the number of people who seem determined to make this presidential assassin, a murderer, into some kind of hero, or at least an innocent. No, the evidence is overwhelming that he was in the window of the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, and he killed President Kennedy, and he severely wounded Texas Governor Connally, and slightly injured a third person. People don't even know the third person was injured in Dealey Plaza, but you'll read. I'm not going to tell you that story. You will read about it Sunday in the Times-Dispatch. And don't cheat and go on the internet. You need to buy the newspaper. Okay. But you've got to be careful with as you interview some of these people. And because I'm not going to name this person, but one of the principals who's still living told a very good friend of mine who is another researcher in this area that for $50,000 she would say anything the researcher wanted. Absolutely anything. Not a problem. There are so many people who've made money off this assassination. And I have to say, even, one of the people that are interviewed there, she's old and she's trying to get a little security, and I understand she's selling a photo. It's okay. But you have to separate the witnesses into these two groups. Well, look, let me talk to you about my book, The Kennedy Half Century, which makes a wonderful holiday gift. It's one-stop shopping, really, if you buy multiple copies, and I'm here to inscribe them. It's terrific. Also, one of my students is out there selling them, and I've told him that he has to buy whatever is not sold tonight. And it's not going to take much to bankrupt him, so I hope you're going to take pity on him. And we use the profits from this to feed the UVA Center for Politics so we can do more studies like this, and I'll tell you about the study. And it has many, many parts. But first I'm going to answer the question that Tom asked, because I thought it was a great way to start out. Why did I get interested in this? I'm a native Virginian, becoming increasingly rare in this Commonwealth. But I grew up in Norfolk, down there on the coast. My family is Catholic. I went to Catholic schools from kindergarten through senior year in high school, got an excellent education. I was in the 6th grade at the assassination. I'll start actually when I was 1960, 7 years old. And believe it or not, I was a semi-normal child. That faded quickly, but at 7, I was semi-normal. I didn't pay much attention to politics, that's for sure. But I did in 1960, because in my school there was this buzz about the Catholic candidate for president. Somebody actually had a chance to win, unlike Al Smith in 1928. So I got interested. Talked to my father. He was very interested in the subject. World War II vet, interested in getting me involved in civic life. So we went down to the Democratic headquarters in Norfolk. I got a bunch of Kennedy literature. And on my own, this was a much safer time, I went door to door in my neighborhood, passing out Kennedy literature. Most people were very nice. But I will never forget this one woman who came to the door, the street next to mine. And she was very pleasant at first, and I handed her a piece of literature. And she threw it back at me. I'm 7. She threw it back at me and said, "I don't vote for papists." Well, I didn't know what a papist was. I had to ask my father. I more or less understood after he explained it. But I got my first glimpse of hate at the age of 7. And it's hard for you to believe, particularly the younger people here, because you think of the great divisions of our time being race and gender and this kind of thing. But at one time, it was religion, amazingly. And the 1960 election was an election about religion. It wasn't about Quemoy and Matsu and the missile gap and all these other things they talked about. 80% of the Catholics voted for John F. Kennedy. It was the 8th sacrament. You were required. You had to go to confession if you didn't vote for him. 69% of the Protestants voted for Richard Nixon. That was the division in the election. It was about religion. So anyway, I don't remember being all that well informed after he won. I remember watching one of the debates probably for 20 minutes until I fell asleep. And the election night, I remember staying up, until almost 9. My father said, "Oh, he's winning. Don't worry about it. Go to sleep." Next morning, I woke up. I can remember him saying, "Well, it's very close, but I think Kennedy will win." But fast forwarding to November 22nd, and I really can remember it like it was yesterday, because the next Thursday was Thanksgiving. By the way, this is exactly the same schedule as 50 years ago. Next Friday is November 22nd. The following Thursday is Thanksgiving. Well, as you know, when you're in elementary school, your life revolves around the big holidays. It's one right after the other. And Thanksgiving's fantastic because it leads to Christmas and Hanukkah and all those other great holidays where you get gifts. So we were thinking about Thanksgiving. I'm sure. I don't really remember what happened in the morning. But it was around 2 in the afternoon, something like that. Because remember, President Kennedy was shot at 12:30 Central Standard Time. It was already 1:30 out east. It was about 2. And I was in a classroom. Remember this next time they talk about class sizes. And I'm all for small class sizes, and I love teachers. How could I not? I am one. But we had 62 boys in this 6th grade class with one nun. And I learned a lot because she was built like a truck driver, and she could hit you like you wouldn't believe. So we paid attention. Believe me, we paid attention. But I remember there was a knock on the door, she went to the door, and we heard her exclaim. And we could tell something terrible had happened. We didn't know what. She came back and she said, "Children, I'm sorry to tell you, the president has been shot. Please take out your rosaries." They were required equipment in Catholic school in those days. We all had one in our desk. So we took out our rosary and we all prayed aloud the rosary. And I honestly don't know how long it was, maybe another half hour or something like that. The knock on the door came, and she didn't need to tell us a thing because she started crying. And we knew the president was dead, and shortly thereafter our school was dismissed. Our parents had already gathered to take us home, and we began this very unusual event for Americans, 4 days in front of the television set. And to young people, again, this doesn't sound unusual, unfortunately, but we had never done it before. The people, I'm 61, the people my age and a little younger, a little older will remember that back then you turned the television on to watch a program and then you turned it off after the program was over, and you actually did other things. You talked with your family and you read a book well, that's all gone. And I think really it began that weekend. That was television's great debut as a news source, supplanting newspapers to a certain degree, to a great degree probably. And so television became our community forum for those 4 days, a chance to share grief and also just to overcome the shock of it. It was horrible. It really is hard to imagine now. And young people say to me, my students say to me, how could that be the equivalent of 9/11? 3,000 people, 3,000 Americans were killed in 9/11. And the answer is because we were in the middle of a hot Cold War. And it was the decapitation of American government. It wasn't just one man. It was the head of American government, the most powerful person in the world, killed in a brutal fashion at a very young age, 46, and that's Kennedy's great advantage. After death, he's forever young. 46 years old, right in front of his wife on a public street. Not many people know the street is Dallas's Elm Street. This was the real nightmare on Elm Street. And it was one of those flashbulb moments. And there have really only been 3 in public life. We all have flashbulb moments in our private life. Sadly, it's usually a death of a close family member or friend. That's a flashbulb moment where you remember everything that happened, who you were talking to and what you said and all of that. Well, the public flashbulb moments had been December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor, the Kennedy assassination, and 9/11. And there are some subsidiary flashbulb moments, like the explosion of the Challenger. But it doesn't quite rise to the level of those other 3. So it was devastating. It was life-changing. It certainly affected the course of the country, and I'll talk about that a little bit too if I have time or later during questions. So it was something that affected me so deeply, and I'll tell you, I still remember having nightmares. For a long time, I had nightmares because a president was kind of a second father figure. You know, you had your father, and then you had, the president. I guess as a Catholic, I had the Pope. So there were 3 of them, but nonetheless. It really deeply affected you, and I suspect it deeply affected those who are old enough to remember in this room, or I doubt you'd be here tonight. You want to think about it more. You want to go back maybe to that time and think about it. So I've been thinking about it all these years, and I had the opportunity to do this book because of my Center for Politics, and our sole goal is to get people civically educated and civically participating. And we found that history and key anniversaries are a great way to do it. It certainly motivates older Americans, and we find it also interests the young because they've heard a little bit about this historic event, and they may want to know more about it. It's a great opportunity if you make it interesting enough for them. So I finally had the opportunity, and I decided to do it. And it's not just a book. It's a multimedia presentation. The Kennedy Half Century is the book. And but in addition to the book, it is a documentary, which I think has already aired in the Richmond area. It's on 99% of the PBS stations in November and early December. And conveniently, it's called The Kennedy Half Century. We named it all the same, mainly so I could remember the names. All the pieces are named The Kennedy Half Century. We have a big, elaborate website, thekennedyhalfcentury.com, and we put some elaborate studies that we couldn't include in their entirety in this book on that website. And then we have a mobile app. And this mobile app you don't know about because you were here and you weren't watching the CBS Evening News tonight. We got the longest piece on the CBS Evening News. We unveiled the app. I went up Monday and spent the day with Bob Schieffer, who was there. He was a reporter for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. Now he wasn't in Dealey Plaza. He had been with the president in Fort Worth overnight and then that morning before he left for Dallas. And he told me, he admitted that he had been up rather late the previous night with some of the Secret Service agents. So he wasn't there, but he went almost immediately to the newspaper newsroom. The telephone rang. He answered it. A woman said, I need a cab ride. I need a taxi. And Bob said, I'm sorry, we're not a taxi service. This is a newsroom, and in case you haven't heard, the president's been shot. We're kind of busy right now. He almost hung up. The woman said, I know. My son's been accused of doing it. It was Marguerite Oswald. Well, he dropped everything he was doing to go out and give her a ride to Dallas from Fort Worth. So they had almost an hour together. And he got a lot of information out of Marguerite Oswald, including the statement, which I've included in the book. Nobody's going to care about Mama. That wife's going to get all the money and attention. Her son's just been accused of killing the President of the United States, and she's worried about who's going to get the press attention and the money. Does that tell you something about Marguerite Oswald? She also used to tell her sons, including Lee Oswald, how worthless they were and what a burden they were to her. How would you like it if your mother told you that over and over? Well, and there are other things that I can say, some a little grotesque, and I'm not going to bring it up in a public forum, but they're in the book. So we have a mobile app. What is this mobile app? This mobile app is something that we decided to investigate as a part of this study. And I'm going to describe it in a moment. But I first want to tell you about the final piece of it is a massive open online course. Are any of you enrolled in my MOOC? I'm delighted to see that. Those of you who aren't, you should be, because it's the best deal you'll ever get. It is not just a college-level course. It's much better than a college-level course. I hope so, given the hundreds of thousands of dollars that have been spent on it. We've been working on it since spring. It's like a TV series, really, about Kennedy's whole life, his administration, his death, and then the legacy through 9 presidents, which is also what the book is about. You can sign up for it right now on Coursera.org. My favorite platform, though, is Apple's iTunes U, iTunes University, iTunes U. I don't know how many of you have used that. It's fantastic. We've been able to build so many other bells and whistles into Apple iTunes U, which you can't do on Coursera. I highly recommend it to you. The great thing also about iTunes U, there's no deadline. Coursera ends next Friday. You won't be able to take it on Coursera anymore. It's on permanently at iTunes U. And you can just watch the videos. You don't have to take the exams. That's the one thing everybody asks me. Am I going to have to take a test? I don't like tests.
Professor Sabato?
Yes.
Stick to the script.
Stick to the script? Okay. So you don't want to hear about the MOOC, huh? Anyway, iTunes U, take a look at that. Okay, now, the book itself and my investigation is divided into 3 parts. The first part is a new investigation of the campaign of 1960 and the Kennedy administration itself. And we've certainly found some new things about the 1960 campaign, and I'll let you take a look at that on your own. The second third is about the assassination. And we wanted, as I say, to make an original contribution there. And, so many books have looked into the Warren Commission, almost all of them critical, for good reason. Now, I want to stress the staff of the Warren Commission did a fine job. The staffers, like even Arlen Specter, you know him he's deceased now, but he was a senator from Pennsylvania for many years. They were young staff members. They were energetic. They tried to do the very best that they could. But the members of the Warren Commission, some of them, had ulterior motives and hidden agendas. You know, the guy connected to the CIA, who'd been the director, his goal was to protect the CIA and not to reveal everything he knew. And then you had a certain member called Gerald Ford. You may have heard of him. He became president. He was the leaker to the FBI, to let the FBI know everything that was going on in the private deliberations to make sure the FBI didn't look bad. And on it went. And Lyndon Johnson had an agenda, which he made clear to the commission. Get this thing over with fast. I've got my election coming up. I want it all out of the way before the peak of the fall election season. He also, we've got a tape-recorded call that he made to J. Edgar Hoover the day after the assassination, in which the two of them basically say, well, it was just Oswald. Now, this is 24 hours after the assassination. It was just Oswald. He did it alone. And they say, this will be great because the people won't demand a nuclear war if it was the Soviet Union or Castro. So it was clearly Oswald, and we don't want to go too much into his background. Really isn't necessary. He was a defector to the Soviet Union. He was a devotee of Castro. There were a lot of questions there, at least questions I would have asked, and I think you might have asked. Well, the staffers had no idea what they were up against. Didn't have a clue. They had no idea that the CIA wasn't telling them what they knew. They didn't know that the FBI wasn't telling them what they knew. They had no idea that the U.S. government was in cahoots with the mafia to try and eliminate Castro. They had no idea that we, in fact, had tried to kill Castro over and over again, and some other world leaders besides. Do you think maybe that could have been a motive for some people to strike out at the head of the U.S. government? Yeah, there's a connection there. Proof is required, but I'm saying you can make that argument. So the Warren Commission, I think, has been deconstructed many times. We didn't think we could make much of a new contribution there, some details here and there. We decided to focus on the second investigation, which was the House Select Committee on Assassinations. And you recall, that was the committee set up by the House in the 1970s, beginning in 1976 through 1979, to reinvestigate the assassinations of both John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King. And it was set up because of the revelations that had started to come out about the CIA, Remember the Church Committee and some other investigations revealing some unpleasant truths about how government had been run, how the Vietnam War had been run, and so on. So that particular committee was close to endorsing the conclusions of the Warren Commission when suddenly some new evidence popped up. They were presented with some dictabelts. Again, some people here will know what a dictabelt is. It was an old-style recording on a waxed belt used by police departments around the United States in their headquarters to record the conversations they were having with officers in the field. On this particular day in Dallas, they had two setups. They had a dictabelt and something called a gray autograph. They had one channel reserved for those in the motorcade and another channel for other police communications. So they had two different a phonograph, which is the gray autograph, plus the belt, the dictabelt. Well, the head of that office, the dispatcher, who later became sheriff and is one of the people interviewed in your Sunday section, Jim Bowles, saved the dictabelts from November 22nd. And the one dictabelt around the time of the assassination at 12:30 p.m. had what the committee said were gunshots. How did they know? They brought audio experts in. They went in and closed down Dealey Plaza one Sunday, fired shots at various targets every few yards so they could measure the sounds. And sure enough, they identified four audio patterns that directly resembled the shots they had fired in Dealey Plaza. Conspiracy, 4 shots. 3 shots, everyone agrees. It's the maximum that could have been fired by Lee Harvey Oswald. So a 4th shot automatically meant a conspiracy. Bingo. And that was their conclusion. President Kennedy was killed as a result of a conspiracy. Well, who were the conspirators? They said, well, they were behind the picket fence on the grassy knoll. That's where the audio indicates the shot came from. But who were they? Well, the director said they could have been the mafia. Somebody else said, well, it could have been a cell in the CIA. Somebody else connected to the committee said could have been anti-Castro Cubans. They had a safe house in Dallas at the time, and on and on. So they said there was a conspiracy directly contradicting the Warren Commission, which said Oswald acted alone, but they didn't identify the conspirators. Well, we decided to look at this less examined part of the federal investigation of the Kennedy assassination. And we were able to use techniques not available to them in the 1970s. And we hired a terrific group that's used by the Pentagon for most of their audio analysis, highly classified audio analysis. And I've got to say, over the past couple of years, I've learned more about audio analysis than I ever wanted to know. Nonetheless, long process. For example, first we had to go through the dictabelts and make sure they hadn't been tampered with. Because the first thing we were going to get from critics was the CIA altered these dictabelts. They've been in the National Archives all these years. You don't seriously think they left them untampered with, do you? Well, there was no tampering. And if you go to our report, you'll see how we did it and how we verified that there was no tampering. Anyway, to make a long story short, and you'll have to get the details in the book and also on the website. We put the entire report on the website. The committee was completely wrong, and we've blown up their report. It turns out that while they thought they had found 4 shots, they could not have found any shots at all. They insisted that the policeman recording those sounds, and the policeman had to have a stuck microphone on his motorcycle to record all the sounds during the key minutes, they said was right behind the presidential limousine, just a few yards behind. So would have recorded all the shots in Dealey Plaza with a microphone that's the equivalent in power of today's telephone receiver. That's how weak it was. In fact, the policeman with the stuck microphone was at the Trade Mart, 2.5 miles away from Dealey Plaza. There was zero chance that he could have recorded the sounds. It's much too far away. Also, he was revving his motorcycle at the time at 12:30. So it would have been even more impossible to have shots. To me, this proves, for your own personal use, anytime you go and determine you're going to find something, you probably are going to find it. They wanted to find those 4 shots, and they did. They found the 4 shots, except there are no shots. The spikes are actually the rattling of the microphone on the motorcycle. And it turns out that there are about a dozen other spikes that are almost indistinguishable from the 4 they picked out as gunshots. Now, the app, just so you know, what we've done for the first time, and this will also be on CBS This Morning tomorrow morning, and I'm going down to Dallas for Face the Nation from the 6th floor museum for Sunday. This app, which you can get on the Android and Apple platforms, it's 99 cents. You can afford 99 cents. This has the entire sound of November 22nd, 1963. The Dictabelt started at 9:44 a.m. before Air Force One even landed. They go all the way to 3:57 p.m. in the afternoon after Air Force One had left with the body of President Kennedy and President Johnson. Air Force Two had left. The press plane had left. Believe me, it is engrossing. It is mesmerizing. It is a time tunnel to November 22nd, and you hear everything that was going on behind the scenes, from the normality of a presidential visit, if that can ever be normal, concerns about crowd size and crowd control, all the way to the chaos that occurred right after 12:30, then the sorrow and grief at Parkland Hospital as the first announcement of the president's death is made, not by Walter Cronkite and not by any of the reporters gathered there, but by the policeman with the stuck microphone who had dashed to Parkland Hospital with Lyndon Johnson's car and had arrived before Mrs. Kennedy had let President Kennedy be taken in the gurney. She was concerned that people would take photographs of his destroyed head. A third of his brain was blown out of his head. He was dead instantly in front of the Texas School Book Depository building. She did not want anyone to see that. They had to wait until his head was covered before they could take him out. But this particular policeman went right over to the limousine to see if he could help. He looked into the car, saw the gore, saw the president's head destroyed, and said over the microphone, "I think the president's head's been blown apart." That was the first announcement of the president's death. Only the police knew it. So anyway, all of this, I think, it's important to know the truth. It's important to get all the details out there, even 50 years later. But we've got a lot more to learn. There are 1,171 CIA documents alone that have not been released. They're supposed to be released in 2017, according to the Records Act, passed and signed in October of 1992. But the president elected in 2016 will determine whether or not those particular documents will be released. Hey, it will have been 54 years. Almost everybody in the documents, the authors, those mentioned, will have been long dead. And I hope we're not using the same methods that we were using in 1963. Why can't we see them? We should be able to see them. And we all, as a people, have to insist on seeing them. I'm not saying there's anything there. There may be, but we won't know until we see them. My own conclusion on the assassination was simply this. Lee Harvey Oswald did it, but I refuse to rule out the possibility that someone encouraged him or that someone was there in Dealey Plaza to help him until I read those documents and see what's there and see the documents from other government agencies. It's important to read all the evidence before you can do it, but it's evidence that matters. Theories are a dime a dozen. There are over 300 theories of the Kennedy assassination. 300. There's everything but a UFO. That's the only thing that hasn't been proposed. A theory's great, but you need hard evidence. You need evidence that could stand up in court. You need evidence that could stand up against a withering cross-examination. So we've provided, I think, a pretty good summary of all of the respectable theories, and we've made our own conclusions. And finally, the last part of the book, which I'm most proud of, traces Kennedy's legacy through 9 presidencies and shows how every president has used Kennedy's words and deeds to help them accomplish their own agendas. Why? We did the largest public opinion poll that anyone's ever done of a historical figure. 2009 adults in a poll plus 6 focus groups, 2 of them in Richmond, 2 in Chicago, 2 in Los Angeles. And we found that Kennedy is the most popular post-World War II president, despite his very short tenure. You know, it's the assassination as much as anything that converted him into the most popular president. And he's the only post-World War II president who's popular with Democrats, Republicans, and independents. The other presidents all have a partisan profile. That's why Democrats and Republicans, including Ronald Reagan, who used him most shrewdly to get anti-communist legislation passed and his tax cut, similar to Kennedy's tax cut in the early 60s, they all use him because it works. It's a tool in their toolbox, and it's useful for them, and I'm all for it. I'll stop there. There's so much more we could discuss, but I'm sure you have a lot of questions. And did you want me to show any of those videos?
That's my question. Do you want to show one of your videos, and then we'll get Marcus and Dean to position themselves over here?
All right. Well, is that okay with you, Marcus and Dean?
Yeah. Talking about the inevitability, I think you.
Yeah,
have something.
I will. I'll tell. Well, we've got 2 videos we put together to help illustrate the book, and the first video. I think helps to prove an argument I've made in the book, which is President Kennedy's assassination was nearly inevitable at some point in, 8 years, if he had served 8 years. Why? Because the thin blue line was never thinner. Back then, you had no metal detectors. President Kennedy wanted crowds to envelop him, and we've got some examples of it. In the Dallas motorcade, there were 12 Secret Service agents. As he passed in a 12-mile route, 200,000 people and hundreds of open windows in buildings, any one of which could have hidden a sniper. And he'd done that all over the world, all over the United States. Many plots had already been broken up, plots to kill President Kennedy. It's a miracle in some ways he made it to November 22nd. And we learned the hard way, unfortunately. Americans often learn the hard way that you have to change practice. And finally, we toughened up the protection. Obviously not enough, since Ford had 2 assassination attempts and President Reagan was nearly killed in an assassination attempt. But what you'll see in this particular video is unthinkable today. It's unthinkable today. Put a president in an open limousine, have him stand up for miles. President Kennedy had had more than his share of assassination threats since the 1960 election. In fact, there was a very serious one that could easily have succeeded. The full-page ad in the Dallas Morning News accused the president of supporting communists and using the Justice Department to silence critics. anyone with a pistol could have fired through or over the fence at point-blank range. Secret Service did not have the personnel to check the buildings back then. They didn't check the buildings and see who was waiting behind the open windows and so on. Now, the second one I'm going to show you gives you a taste of what's in the app. It'll give you a sense of what the police tapes show.
We've got some pretty large crowds down here and very few officers. Crossing downtown Dallas now. Pretty good crowd there. Big crowd, yes. Looks like the president's been hit. Have people stand by. 10-4 Parkland has been notified. Station 5 to move all men available out of my department back into the railroad yards there in an effort to try to determine if what and when happened down there and hold everything secure until the homicide and other investigators can get there. The president's head was practically blown off. There's a possibility that 6 or 7 more people may have been shot. On the fifth floor of this bookstore company down here, we found empty rifle holes, and looked like the man had been there for some time. Can you obtain from one if the president is going to appear at the trademark? Don't know, but I feel reasonably sure that he will not. We request information as to extent of injuries to the president, and also if the governor was hit. The governor was hit, but we do not have any information as to extent of injury. Notify 1 that we have an officer involved in a shooting at 10th and Patton. We don't know the extent of it yet. Like a 30-30 or some type of a Winchester. It was a rifle? A rifle, yes. Attention all squads, the suspect from Elman, Houston is reported to be an unknown white male about 30, slender build, 5 feet 10 inches tall, 165 pounds, armed with what is thought to be a 30-30 rifle. No further description at this time or information. The officer involved in the shooting, which is Officer J.D. Tippett, we believe, was pronounced DOA at Methodist 128. Any report on the condition of the president and the governor? Well, I understand the president's dead and the governor don't know about him.
We have information that a suspect just went in the Texas theater on West Jefferson.
10-4.
Supposed to be hiding in the balcony. They had a shooting of a police officer, which was DOA at Methodist. The suspect has been apprehended at Texas Theater en route to station.
10-4, thank you.
We have information now. Judge Sarah Hughes is leaving Parkland en route to Love Field to swear President Johnson in.
Both Air Force 1 and 2 are gone now. The only thing we have left is the news plane. We don't need anything else out here. We don't need an ambulance or anything. We're just a matter of cleaning up now.
Well, sure, but I mean, they're professionally trained to do that. What was really odd was sections we didn't put in that particular video coming a little later, in which this strange normality returns to Dallas, and the dispatcher says to one officer in a SWAT car, "Can you go down to such and such a bakery and get some hamburger buns and take it to this diner? They need some." The whole world has changed, and even in the morning, this thing was so primitive, this system was so primitive, that telephone conversations could bleed over into what was being recorded at police headquarters. There are several of them on here. A couple having a fight, having a lover's quarrel, a guy trying to borrow money from a friend and the friend wouldn't go along, and a guy cursing his favorite football teams because they lost. It's so weird to hear this normality mixed in with a day that will live in infamy like December 7th.
Okay. All right. We'll let you have a break. Great opening presentation. Markus, why don't you come out from over here, sit over here. As you tee up your why did the Times-Dispatch, you two guys in particular, go to Dallas?
Well, we did a. Do you hear me? Yeah. We did a special weekend, or actually a full weekend coverage of the March on Washington in August, which was where Martin Luther King gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. And as I wrote my contribution to the series, I realized that we're going to have the same year, later this year, an anniversary that also dates 50 years back, and that was the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. So I considered proposing to our editors that we go to Dallas for this and to do some of our own reporting. And around the same time, I called Dr. Sabato because I knew that he was about to publish his new book, The Kennedy Half Century, which makes a great Christmas gift.
Okay. All right. You guys are out of control now.
And so I asked him, can you get us in touch with some of the witnesses that you interviewed for your book? And he said he can sure do that. And he said, well, I'm going to be in Dallas in October. Why don't you come along? So we ran this by our editors, and we were glad that they signed off on this so we can do some unique reporting. And we're going to be able to run a package this Sunday in the paper, but also online. We have a fantastic multimedia package that we put together that's all going to be original reporting and not just wire stories, but probably most of the newspapers in the country will do.
Okay. And then, Dean, being the expert photographer you are, first moving pictures of a national event, you heard Dr. Sabato talk about it being the introduction of television in a prominent way. You're a visual guy. 50 years later, we've seen everything.
We have. And we were lucky enough to spend time with one of the guys who was the first broadcaster to talk about what he saw firsthand in Dealey Plaza. And, may have been the first guy to start that visual trend that we're, seeing now. People still talk about it. I was, not born yet, but my mom was expecting me.
That'd be some memory, Dean.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I know for sure where I was. But when we went down there, we had a lot of witnesses that we were interviewing and photographing around Dealey Plaza. One in particular, Mary Ann Moorman, who we'll show a picture of. She's sort of well known in the realm of people who follow this. And by follow this, I mean there's a clan of folks who hang around Dealey Plaza all day and sell little newspapers and trinkets and whatever. And as Mary Ann came over to the spot where she made the famous Polaroid photograph with us, it attracted a crowd. In about 3 minutes, we had 20 people sort of just hanging around and taking pictures of her because the folks across the way had pointed out, there's a witness, there's a witness. So there's still that interest. And one of the things that we were able to do is, of course, with technology being what it is, rather than just give the printed pages in the newspaper, which we think is a fantastic thing we're very proud of, we were able to capture some video, and I'd like to show a preview.
Let's do that.
A preview of that, that this runs.
No, we know that you don't wear a hat. Couldn't let you leave Fort Worth without providing you with some protection against the rain.
I'll put it on in the White House on Monday. If you'll come up there, you'll have a chance to see it then.
Buell Wesley Frazier was a co-worker of Lee Harvey Oswald's at the Texas School Book Depository.
The two men often carpooled together, and Fraser took Oswald to work on the morning of the assassination, noticing a package the would-be assassin brought along.
He walked around here, and he looked in the window like this to see if anyone had seen him. But my mother, she looked up and she was startled, and she says, "Who is that man?" "Oh, Mom," I says, "that's the man I work with." And we got in the car, and as I was sitting down, I glanced over my right shoulder, and I caught a glimpse of a package laying on the back seat. And I said, "What's in the package, Lee?" He says, "Curtain rods. Don't you remember? We talked about that yesterday." And I says, "Oh, yes." I said, "We did talk about that, and you did tell me." I said, "Okay."
Air Force Number 1, ladies and gentlemen, carrying the President of the United States with the seal on the side. There's Mrs. Kennedy, and the crowd yells, "And the President of the United States." And I can see his suntan all the way from here.
I was totally captivated by Mrs. Kennedy and Mr. Kennedy. I thought, that's what a first couple ought to look like.
And here they come, right down toward us. I can see Mrs. Kennedy, and they're going to come right on down and shake hands with everybody.
Piers Allman, a Dallas newscaster, admired Kennedy and decided to watch the motorcade from right across the street from the Texas School Book Depository.
Jackie had the little pink outfit on, the little pillbox hat, and she had this sort of wave, you know, and that big grin. She had the roses, and JFK was on the other side of her. She was closest to me, about 8 feet away, and he was on the other side of the car, and he would brush the forelock of hair off his forehead. He had this sort of acknowledging, you know, wave. And I was so carried away, I hollered out something like, "Hey, welcome to Dallas, Mr. President." And then the car turned, and boom, that first sound that you never forget. Absolutely.
Car salesman James Tack was on the way to a lunch date when he got stuck in traffic off Dealey Plaza and left his car to watch the presidential motorcade. When the first shot was fired and missed the president, the bullet hit the curbside near where Tack was standing, and his face was sprayed with fragments of concrete.
No more out of my car than I hear the pop of a firecracker, I thought. And I paused thinking what kind of idiot would be throwing firecrackers with the president driving by. And then I heard the crack of 2 rifle shots with something stinging me in the face. And I realized those are rifle shots. The president's driving by, something serious is going on.
Mary Ann Moorman came to Dealey Plaza because she wanted to get a glimpse of Jackie Kennedy and take a picture of the president for her 11-year-old son.
When the motorcade turned the corner with the president's car, it was really getting exciting. Jean hollered, "Look this way, Mr. President, we want to take your picture." And then as it got closer to us, I put the camera up to my face to focus, to be able to snap the picture when I thought it was time. And when I snapped the picture, I heard what I thought was a firecracker. The thought went through my head. I saw his hair jump, but it wasn't just his hair, it was the back of his head.
Dr. Bob McClelland, a surgery instructor at Parkland Hospital, was one of several physicians who tended to the mortally wounded president. In a strange twist, McClelland also worked on Lee Harvey Oswald less than 48 hours later.
And I pushed the door open to Trauma Room 1 and was immediately horrified by seeing the president lying there on his back underneath an operating room light shining down on his bloody head. And Dr. Perry was just putting a little drape on a wound in the neck. And as I walked by, he said, "Bob, there's a wound here in his neck, just to the right of his windpipe and just above his collarbone. And it looks like it's about maybe 1/4 of an inch in size, like a bullet wound. And we're going to explore that," he said, "and would you go and stand at the head of the gurney and lean over and put this retractor that he gave me in the incision I'm about to make so we can see. And Dr. Perry put that drape over that wound and then began to make an enlarged incision, including that bullet wound that he had described to me.
Did the president show any signs of life at that point?
Not at that time, but he did have good electrocardiographic activity. He was not dead. Some people have said, well, he was dead anyway. No, he was not. In fact, he was even making gasping attempts to breathe, but he had excellent electrocardiographic activity on his heart, so he definitely was, technically, was not dead. And so when I went and stood at the head of the cart, the first thing I said, my God, have you seen the back of his head? And they said, no, we haven't had a chance. We just walked in here in front of you. And I said, well, the back of his head on the right side is missing.
President shaking hands with the people. He's waving at a lot of people, smiling, Secret Service men all around. Boy, this is something. They break right away and come right up to the fence, and the people who waited all morning in this fence are rewarded with a glimpse, and a lot of them with a close look and a handshake with the President of the United States and his wife. And he's coming right down toward us and toward our fine camera positions here.
Was it difficult to find 50 years later these vivid
with the
memories?
President of the United States and his wife?
For two reasons, I think no. First of all, it's such a deep groove in your brain. I think the memory is there permanently. And you have to remember these people have been remembering and telling these stories for now almost 50 years. And there's been very little variations. I've gone back to interviews with most of them were recorded in the 60s, and they're all identical. You know, like Dr. Sabato said, they're consistent, and you believe their stories.
Markus, you heard Dr. Sabato talk about the generational impact. Did you see that in the coverage of this story?
Yeah, what really struck me was people of my generation, and I was born when Nixon was living out his last weeks in the White House. To us, Kennedy has always been the assassinated president, so we're very familiar with the footage from the Zapruder film. But people of Dr. Sabato's generation, they, like a lot of you have been saying earlier, they have lived through this. And what I've learned from this trip was I realized how horrifying and traumatic this was, especially for those people who witnessed this event. When you imagine you're being in Dealey Plaza, which is such a small place, you associate it because it's such a big monumental historic event. You believe it's such a big place, but it's really very tiny. And you imagine these people being 8 feet away from the president as he's getting his head blown off. It must be traumatizing. I believe people have discovered their own vulnerability at that moment when they figure out what happens to the president, the most protected man in the world. If he can get killed like this, what can happen to me just as a regular person? And that's what I brought back from this trip.
Dean, will you have conclusions Sunday that will surprise us, or did you think the mission was just capturing the impact 50 years later?
No, we didn't go there to find a new revelation or make a new discovery. We wanted to tell the stories of the people who were there that day and tell them as accurate as possible and provide good photo and video material to go along with it, and I hope it worked out.
Just recording what they said is extremely important, and let them tell their story.
Okay. Well, that's the story of the Kennedy assassination through the eyes and ears of the author and the journalist. We've got 30 minutes left in the public square. I've got one mic. Bob Rayner will have another mic. We're going to bring Dr. Sabato up center stage. And this is where you get a chance to ask questions, offer observations, take it from here. Here's the deal. Everybody needs to say what their name is and hold the mic like this. You go like this, can't hear you. Hold the mic like this. Okay. All right. All right. Who wants to go first? Okay, sir. And make sure the mic works.
This is a test. Test, test, test.
We test the mic.
Okay.
Good. Can I stand up and talk? Identify yourself.
My name is Tom Harris, and I have a question regarding a comment that Dr. Sabato made about plots against the president. You said there was a very serious plot that had happened apparently just not long before Dallas. I was wondering if you could tell us who was involved in that plot. Was it a mob kind of thing or something different?
Sure.
Good. Thanks for that. Appreciate it.
First, let me just say that was a terrific film. You all did a great job with it.
Thank you.
And those people are real. I like every person in there. They have very different views about the assassination, by the way. Some think Oswald did it. Some think it was a conspiracy. And, I'm sure all that will be in the full report. But, look, it really started. I saw John F. Kennedy only one time, got a glimpse of him 5 days before the election of 1960. Came down to Norfolk. They incorrectly believed they could win Virginia. In fact, it was Nixon won by 5 points. That was in a more Republican era in Virginia, or beginning of a Republican era for presidential elections. He went from Norfolk to Chicago, and there were 2 different incidents in Chicago where men were caught with loaded weapons running after the presidential limousine, trying to catch up to the limousine. They were tackled by police because they looked suspicious. Then in December, while President Kennedy was president-elect down in Palm Beach, he was nearly assassinated. Very close call. And let me just put it bluntly, a guy who was nuts. That's the technical term. Who was from New Hampshire, drove down to Palm Beach, had some insane reason as to why he hated President Kennedy at that time, or President-elect Kennedy. His car was loaded with explosives and dynamite. And at that time, as President-elect, there were hardly any Secret Service assigned to him. So he had just a handful, and this gentleman was able to get really within yards of Kennedy repeatedly. And once he was so close to him, he was getting ready to ram the President-elect's car when Mrs. Kennedy came out of the compound with the newborn. And a pang of conscience hit him. Everybody agrees that had he decided to strike at that moment, they all would have been killed. He didn't. He tried to kill Kennedy in a Catholic church a day later, and they caught him right after that. That was very serious. Now, there were a whole bunch of plots that we know about. Some we still don't know about. I mean, they don't publicize all these things. There were others in Chicago, but the one that you're referring to was in the Tampa, Miami area, and there was a story written about it just a few days ago, reliving it, with a right-wing racist, segregationist named Milteer, Milteer, in case you want to Google it. And he had told an informant on a tape that Kennedy was a dead man. They already had things arranged. And the informant said, well, how are you going to kill him? Trying to get as much information out as possible. And he said, we're going to kill him with a high-powered rifle firing from several floors up in a building. That was in the Miami area, and this was just a few days before Dallas. Now, was it connected? I don't think so, but I'm not sure. And you can read more about it if you want. But look, the 60s were coming. I mean, we're in the 60s, but it was a period of great turmoil. You may recall. Some of you may recall this. And it was only going to get worse for anyone serving as president with that low level of security.
Good. Thanks for the question. Anybody else? We've got Bob in the back, and I'm up front. Okay. Back for more.
Oh, fantastic. Then you can get 2 questions. I have no problem with it.
Can hold the mic up.
Andrew, it's a lot of emphasis, I know, on the assassination and et cetera, but I want to ask a question about legacy. I think it's at the end of your book where you start saying that with the passing of my generation, less people will know about Kennedy. So the question is, what do you think historians will remember as the most significant legacy of John Kennedy?
Good question. Thank you.
It won't be the Cuban Missile Crisis. That was important. It's what historians love to write about. But my guess is in 100 years or 500 years, it'll be the space program. Because this shows the importance of executive leadership and inspiration. When John Kennedy went before Congress in May of 1961 and declared that we would, by the end of the decade, land a man on the moon and return him safely to the Earth, the vehicles weren't yet invented. The metal alloys weren't yet invented. Can you imagine what would happen to a president today who went before Congress or had a press conference and proposed something like this, and when the question came, how are we going to do it? Do you have the plans? Where are the designs? Oh, well, they haven't been invented yet. We have to come up with new alloys that'll do this. I hope we can do it. I think we can. No, in those days we said, we can do it. We believed we could do it. We thought we could do anything. Maybe it was an illusion, but that's what we believed. And the president made it happen. He inspired us. We took up that cause. We were all obsessed with it. Young people were obsessed with it. I remember counting down every space launch and knowing everything about all the astronauts. I loved it. I was more interested in science than politics back then, Tom. It's probably been better for the world if I'd gone in that direction. But that's what I think. That's what I think will be most remembered about Kennedy.
Okay. Other questions, comments? Okay. Walk over here. Need your blue. All right, we'll wait for you. Need your blue card, and I'm going to give you a mic. Okay. Okay. Make sure you hold it up.
Sure. I was a student at GW when Kennedy was assassinated. Actually, I saw him in '59 when I visited the college and went to the Senate. Saw quite a few people, Johnson and Kennedy and any number of people. We loved John Kennedy. And in many of the best kinds of ways, to me, it was the beginning of the cult of personality that we've seen a lot of since then. Do you think if he had survived and served 2 terms that cult of personality would have lasted, or would have chickens have come home to roost in a way? And I still get chills and very sad and upset when I think about that day and what went on that weekend in Washington. But I don't know that he would have lasted. And I look at it very realistically. I taught history and political science at VCU for a number of years, but I'm not sure it would have lasted.
Well, I think you're very wise. And it's not just because of the chance, which was very real, that we would have learned about the yang instead of the yin. Kennedy was as cautious in public life, far more cautious than Lyndon Johnson. I hope nobody here actually thinks Kennedy would have sent 535,000 troops into Vietnam. Get real. Texas big. Everything was Texas big. Kennedy was very cautious about the budget. Rejected the war on poverty, only wanted a few demonstration projects. Johnson hears about it the day after Dallas, tells the economic aide, go full tilt, that's my kind of program. Make it national. Spend, spend, spend. Johnson was as different as night and day from Kennedy. But we all know about the private life, too, which I condemn in the book. You cannot support what he did. It was recklessness beyond reason. And he was putting himself in a terrible position, a position to be blackmailed. You don't think the other nations' intelligence services knew what he was doing? Of course they did. I mean, he even talked openly to the British Prime Minister about how he'd get headaches if he didn't have sex with a new woman every day. Seriously. So you can condemn that, and it may have come out, may very well have come out. But let me tell you one quick anecdote. Kennedy answered your question himself. In 1962, he invited a Lincoln historian into the White House to give a lecture about Lincoln, and Kennedy asked the first question after the lecture. And he said, would Lincoln have been as popular today if he had not been assassinated and lived through 2 terms? And of course the historian said, no, because he died at the peak of power, just having won the Civil War and restored the Union, and he didn't have to deal with the intractable problems of Reconstruction. Kennedy literally said to his wife later, well, if they're going to take me out now, post-Cuban Missile Crisis, would be a good time to do it.
Yes. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm Cardin Baylor, and my question concerns Kennedy's legacy as far as LBJ is concerned with the Great Society. Do you think that he would have been able to carry forth with some of the civil rights actions that the government passed after he died?
Well, consider that. Now, let's leave the private life aside. Remember, if that had been revealed, he would have been the first president to resign, not Richard Nixon. Okay? This was very different than Bill Clinton got a pass because of the 90s. The standards had changed a lot by the 90s. But in the 60s, he was sold as the family man with that beautiful wife and these two fantastic children. The family image clearly made the difference in that very close election. He would have been out in a day. I mean, there's no way he would have survived as president. So we never know if that's going to happen. But he would also have faced Barry Goldwater. That was a done deal by the time of the assassination. Goldwater was virtually locked in to be the nominee. My guess is that instead of LBJ's 61% against Goldwater, Kennedy would have gotten about 55, would have been 55-45. So far fewer Democrats would have been pulled into the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate than Johnson got because of the guilt over the assassination. Remember, Kennedy won a shade over 49% in beating Richard Nixon. Several months after the assassination, Gallup asked Americans, who did you vote for in 1960? 64% of Americans claimed to have voted for John F. Kennedy. That's how LBJ got 61%. So I think the Civil Rights Act would not have passed in 64, but would have passed in 65 after Kennedy had been reelected with additional Democrats from the North and West. I don't know about the Voting Rights Act. That would have been tougher. And Medicare, don't know about that. But you also would have not gotten the escalation in Vietnam. I don't believe he would have withdrawn troops the way some of his acolytes insist. I think he would have kept it at a low boil. And as I say, nowhere near 535,000 troops. I'd be surprised if it even reached 100,000. That was Jack Kennedy versus Lyndon Johnson.
And Dean and Markus, anything you might want to add, feel free to jump in. Bob, you got a question in the back?
Got a question in the back. Is this mic working? Can you all hear me? No. The mic's not. Yeah, the mic is working. Here we go. You want to stand up?
Michael Newsom. I'm one of your MOOC students, and was curious that you.
And I'm gonna give you an A because you're here.
Thanks. I hope so. I was curious that you mentioned the space program because I thought I saw on Twitter this morning with your name under 5 myths that he would have compromised the space program because he may have gone into a venture with the Russians. But anyway, I was I just started reading the book, so I don't know if my question is answered in your book. I'm just curious about the route, because so many things had to come together for us to be where we are now. And even on the segment about the assassination, it says that when the route went through Dealey Plaza, there were even very few people there. So I just curious, as far as conspiracy theories, do people have any dirt on how and who laid out the route?
Sure, that's been well investigated. And you want to tell the story? Because I think you looked into that, didn't you?
We looked into that. I mean, the route is usually that's being handled by the advanced teams of the Secret Service. But what you said correctly, there's so many different circumstances that led to him being assassinated that day at that particular place. It was raining that morning. In Fort Worth, it was raining heavy when he left. You can see the video footage of his speech at the Hotel Texas. People were wearing raincoats, umbrellas. And it was raining that morning in Dallas when Buell Frazier took Lee Harvey Oswald to work. They were talking about how bad the weather was, and it was raining. So, but when Kennedy landed at 11:37 that morning at Love Field Airport, that's when the sky parted. And that's when they decided to take the bubble top down. And that obviously made Kennedy the perfect target. Larry has been talking about that earlier, too. Kennedy's limousine was not bulletproof, and the only bulletproof limousine at the time was J. Edgar Hoover's. So there was a lot of things coming together that could have been avoided, but I share, and I think Dean does too, share Larry's belief that there was no conspiracy. It's just
Probably.
From what we know, as journalists, you have standards when you write about it. You have to make sure that you got enough proof so you could print it in the paper without being sued. And in this particular case, most conspiracy theories.
So that's how it works.
In this particular case, it just doesn't hold
these
up.
things.
Yeah.
And I feel sure that Oswald fired a gun that day. I don't think there's any doubt. He fired a gun that day.
Okay. Other questions, comments? Okay, coming around. Excuse me. Here. Thank you. Welcome.
Richard Bradshaw, Dr. Sabato, it sounds as if you still have an open mind as to revelations that may be coming out in the CIA documents, 1,100 plus that are there.
Yes.
And there's some speculation that there's others beyond that. Is there speculation on your part, or is it just we just have to wait and see?
Well, I'll go ahead and speculate because that's 2017. You will have long forgotten this by then, in case I'm wrong. But I'm convinced, and I want to give credit to Jeff Morley and his website, jfkfacts.org. Jeff's done a lot of research into this, former Washington Post reporter, and he's obsessed like we all are. Don't ever go down this rabbit hole, all right? I'm just telling you all, you'll get enough in this one book. Just finish the book, and then let it go, okay? But look, on the CIA, I don't subscribe to the theory that there was a hidden cell. I understand why people come up with that, because back then the CIA had all kinds of deals with contract killers, not just mafia killers. We were running, as I'm going to quote Lyndon Johnson, what he told Walter Cronkite at the end of his term. He says, we were running a damn Murder Incorporated around the world. We were. Now, it was a different era, and it was a brutal era. It was the Cold War, and look at what the Soviets were doing, and the Chinese and all the rest. But I don't think it was a cell within the CIA getting back at Kennedy because they were upset about the Bay of Pigs and the fact that he didn't drop the bombs in the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he got the nuclear test ban treaty. They have an elaborate theory. Again, no proof, no hard proof that it happened. But I'll tell you what I'm suspicious of. I believe that the CIA has been lying probably because they were following Oswald. They were keeping up with him, and we have some memos that suggest as much. There was a memo by senior CIA officials in October 1963, a month ahead of the assassination, that talked about Oswald's maturing. Yeah, he matured right into a presidential assassin. They missed it. They missed it, and they didn't want Americans to know that their spy agency that was supposed to be able to detect things like this missed something this big that resulted in the death of a president. So that's my guess. I have no idea, whether it will be borne out, but I've seen enough memos to suggest that's the direction.
So down the rabbit hole we go. Yeah.
Yeah, down the rat hole.
Yeah.
Right.
Other questions? Okay. Go get this gentleman over here. Excuse me. Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Jerry Jones. I was wondering, why weren't there more people gathered at in the Texas Book Depository, and why? And you mentioned that there wasn't a lot of security there. Why? Can you explain more about that?
Sure. Believe it or not only were all those crowds you saw unscreened, but the Secret Service and even the local sheriff's department and police had not gone into the buildings to investigate who might be there. See, today, they actually secure all the windows. You can't even have windows open if a president's passing by, and they never pass by in an open car. But, I mean, they really do the protection upright. Remember, back then, we didn't have air conditioning, or at least not many people had it. And so that was one reason, in Texas in particular, you could open all the windows. It tended to get kind of hot without air conditioning. So they hadn't checked any of the buildings or the windows. They didn't have sharpshooters on the tops of the buildings. They might have tried it, and they did do it in Washington from time to time for inaugurations and visits of foreign leaders, but they didn't do it in Dallas. So it just wasn't done. I've always remembered what one of the Secret Service guys who was with the motorcade, once he got back on Air Force One right after Johnson had taken the oath and the plane was getting ready to take off, he literally was pounding the wall of the plane, and he was saying, "We've never lost a president before," which was true because, remember, the Secret Service was assigned after William McKinley's assassination to Teddy Roosevelt. But they forgot Teddy Roosevelt was shot running again in 1912. Herbert Hoover was nearly assassinated in South America while he was on a pre-inauguration tour of South America. Franklin Roosevelt was nearly killed as president-elect. The bullet missed him by 2 inches and hit Mayor Cermak of Chicago and killed Mayor Cermak in 1933 down in Miami. President Truman came close to assassination with the Puerto Rican nationalists when he was living in Blair House while the White House was being renovated. We were just living in Disneyland. We refused to learn the lessons of the past. Gee, there we go, Santayana.
And I think to respond to your question, why were there not a lot of people at Dealey Plaza? It was the end of the motorcade. The triple underpass, the famous triple underpass. The limousine was supposed to go underneath there, to go straight on the freeway up to the Trade Mart, which is less than two miles away. So at that point, also the Secret Service had let their guards down. They thought this was over. All the 250,000 people almost. They were among downtown Dallas, among the main routes, along Main Street up to Houston Street. But at Dealey Plaza, there was hardly anyone there, 200 people.
And I can tell you, having covered our current president a couple dozen times, the bubble is much tighter now.
And the beast, the car.
Much tighter.
The beast. Yeah. Nothing, even explosives can't get through it. Chemical attacks, they've got their own air supply.
Yeah, the windows are this thick.
Let me add, can I just add one thing? This will really blow your minds on assassination theories. If you were going to pick a site to shoot Kennedy that day, there were actually several that were good sites. But the best one was Dealey Plaza, because right behind the grassy knoll and the picket fence was a parking lot with the train tracks there. You had an easy exit, and you could be guaranteed there weren't going to be big crowds right at the end of the route. That's not where people would gather. What about the possibility that two unrelated gunmen, Lee Harvey Oswald and someone else representing the Cubans, the mafia, whatever, picked Dealey Plaza? One of them was behind the picket fence, the other one in the school book depository, unaware of one another. I admit it's like 1%, but I thought I'd throw it out there to blow your minds.
Okay. Got a question over here, and we've got about 5 minutes left. Dr. Sabato will be around later afterwards to sign his his book.
Both.
Okay. My name is Anant Tyagarajan. If JFK were alive today, what do you think he would regret most about his presidency, politically speaking?
Well, Bay of Pigs. It's the biggest mistake he made during the entire term in a public sense. And he admitted it. One good thing, and I give him full credit for this, he took full responsibility quickly and said, blame me. We still remembered Harry Truman signed, the buck stops here. There's a hint for modern presidents there. And his popularity went up. It went up to 80%. It was the high for his entire nearly 3-year presidency. So, but Bay of Pigs was a bloody disaster.
Got a question over here? Welcome.
I'm David Rayner. I'm Bobby's younger brother, and his actual first memory on Earth is tormenting me as I lay helplessly in a playpen. I think you had noted that JFK was much more of a centrist as a politician than Bobby Kennedy and Teddy Kennedy. I'm curious, I know this is pure speculation, had he served out 2 terms, do you think that their ideologies would have been drastic or noticeably different as politicians had JFK been a 2-term president?
I don't think JFK would have evolved that much. I suspect he would have kept Bobby and Teddy from becoming as liberal as they were. Remember, he was the elder brother at that point, and they followed his lead. And Bobby really became more liberal because of the assassination. You know, he went away for a year and thought and did this and did that, and Teddy became more liberal really over time. It was really in the 70s that he started moving substantially to the left. So my sense is that Jack Kennedy would have kept them closer to the moderate middle rather than they pulling Jack Kennedy to the left.
Question over here in the front, and then Bob will hit the ones in the back.
You talked about the physical aspects of control. I just wondered from your perspective, Dr. Sabato,
the changes that have taken place in the 60s. You mentioned the 2 reports that came out about the assassination, but then more recently we've got the government telling us, or telling the public, about Benghazi and weapons of mass destruction. Do you think we've made progress, or if we regressed, or is it about the same?
Well, that's a tough question, because I've been focusing so heavily on the JFK story. I think there's always a tendency in government to keep things as secret as possible, not simply to ward off criticism, but also because knowledge is power. And I'm grateful to the National Archives for cooperating with us, but I have to tell you, it was a struggle. Knowledge is power. They have these materials in there. It may technically belong to us, the people, but I had to go to several members of their board just to pry out of there the Dictabelts that we have made into this mobile app. I don't know if I mentioned it to you, Tom.
I'm going to have to take my shoes off and count how many times you mentioned it. But in fairness, how long did you spend on the book? How long did it take?
5 years.
Well, why not? 5 years of your work? Hawk the heck out of it.
There you go. That's what my publisher makes me do contractually.
That one in the back? Yeah.
I was wondering if part of the conspiracy thinking could be because of Lee Harvey Oswald's odd death 2 days later, and if you looked at that at all in terms of your research.
Well, I think, well, no, your research, Larry, should answer that. But
well, I'll answer. You all can supplement if you want. I approached this being a little more conspiratorial, a lot more actually, than I am now. I'd always been very suspicious, particularly about Jack Ruby. I mean, my God. And he had, the Warren Commission clearly understated his connections to the mafia. Not that he was ever high up. I don't want to, well, I'll go ahead and say it. I'm not sure you could get to 3 digits in counting his IQ. Okay, so I'm not sure that he would have been given any substantial duty. Now, why do I think that incredible circumstance on Sunday, November 24th, was more of an accident than a planned assassination attempt on Oswald? Because if you really look at the facts, it's clear that Ruby was downtown to wire money to one of his strippers. He came out of the Western Union office and he saw commotion down the street. He walked down there. He had easy access to the police department because in those days, when you ran a strip joint, you could be shut down at any time. So he was in the business of supplying favors to the police of all kinds, favors of all kinds. And so he was allowed in, or he slipped in. Take your pick, because we really don't know. And then Oswald came out just shortly after he got there, a minute or two. Why do I not think that had been planned? Because Lee Harvey Oswald, without knowing it, ordered up his own assassination. He was supposed to be taken out of there actually an hour before. Things got behind. And then at the last minute, he requested/demanded a change of clothing. He didn't want to appear before all the national media with his T-shirt. He wanted a sweater and this and that and the other. They had to get him the clothes. It delayed him substantially. He would have been long gone before Ruby was ever in that garage had he not demanded that change of clothing. Now, why would he have ordered up his own assassination? I don't think that was in the plan.
I think there's one hand up near you, Bob. Okay, there, gentlemen. And after him, one more question.
Can you all hear me? All right, my name is George Cherry. Your conclusion that the Dictabelt was off, is that an across-the-board thing where your conclusion is they were not 4 shots, just the Dictabelt didn't say there were 4 shots?
Exactly. There could have been 20 shots. Right. There's no recording.
Right. And then there were 4 shells found on the floor in the depository, correct?
3.
3?
3.
Why have I seen a picture of 4?
I don't know. But there were
last question then. Did they ever find any specific proof that the bullet from that rifle hit Kennedy?
Absolutely.
A bullet from that specific rifle. They found fragments of it in Kennedy?
Well, that kind of bullet, I suppose you could argue that there was an identical rifle and identical bullet someplace else, that both assassins were using Mannlicher Carcano rifles and the bullets that went with them. Okay.
But they
As
were
I say,
not
there are 300 theories. You've just come up with 301.
I was just curious. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Time for one more. Okay. So, who wants it? I got two in the back. Well, I'm over here. Want to flip for it? Okay. Thank you.
Dr. Sabato, my name's Anita Pretty. I just wanted to ask, I never was aware until I watched the show about the assassination last night on PBS that the president's clothes were taken by the Dallas police. Did they ever get back to Washington, or?
They did. It was regrettable in one sense that the autopsy was not done in Dallas, which was the law then. Believe it or not, killing a president was not a federal offense in 1963, and therefore the laws of Texas applied to this murder. And the local coroner was absolutely right to try to stop the coffin, to do the autopsy right in Dallas. What would have been the advantage of that? Well, for one thing, you wouldn't have all the theories about how the bodies were switched and the coffins were switched here and there and everywhere. And second, they would have had the clothing right there, which of course was removed in trauma room 1. The autopsy that was done should never have been done at Bethesda. It was picked by Mrs. Kennedy on the flight. She was in great distress. She picked it because Jack Kennedy was a Navy man. That's why he went to Bethesda. Walter Reed was the right place for the autopsy. They were used to dealing with gunshot wounds. Think about it. What kinds of servicemen they saw as opposed to the servicemen that Bethesda would have seen. And the team that did the autopsy didn't have a whole lot of experience. Oh, God, if only we had had the autopsy done either in Dallas or at Walter Reed, I think there would be a lot fewer questions in that dimension of November 22nd.
And the clothes, they are in the National Archives.
They're in the National Archives. You can't see them.
There are pictures online.
There are pictures of them.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, closing thoughts on an insightful night where you've made 50 years ago come back as if it was today. Closing thoughts.
Well, I want to stress again, because I monopolized the conversation, never, ever be on a panel with a professor. You should know that. But
first and last time.
And by the way, I'm being slipped. The mock students are watching this live. Hello, mock students.
They're out there. There's some here. But anyway, we all know what's happened to journalism. But I think the Richmond area and the state of Virginia, Commonwealth of Virginia, is very lucky to have a newspaper like the Times-Dispatch that can produce a special section like this. It's really terrific. I've learned new things just in running through it. These individuals that I've interviewed for years have actually told them things they didn't tell me. But make sure you read this, and I think that Markus and Dean have done a fantastic job. My final thought is, I understand why we're so focused on November 22nd, and I was focused on it too in doing this book, but it's a third of the book. I don't think any of us would want to be defined by the method and manner and moment of our death. We want to have an assessment of our life. That's only fair, particularly for someone as impactful as a president. So, 2/3 of this book is about Kennedy's life, what he accomplished in public life, and then his life after death, which really is what legacy is for all of us. So I hope on November 22nd and the days leading up to it and the days afterward, we can focus on the life and the achievements of John F. Kennedy, not just the day of his death.
Well said. Gentlemen, anything I want to add? Closing comments?
Well, yeah, we have, Dean and I, we're both very big history buffs and politics fans, and we both have been researching assassination over years, just like probably a lot of you. But in the last 4 months, we have been doing it extensively, and especially in the last 4 weeks, we were in Dallas, we came back, we worked on it a lot. And by now, I think we know almost everything that there is to know, except for what happened. And that's what I think is the trap that Larry was mentioning earlier. Once you get sucked into this hole, it just doesn't let you back out.
I started going to Dealey Plaza in 1991. That was my first trip, and I've been there 5 or 6 times over the years. And it's amazing. If you have seen the Zapruder film, that's why that clip is in the video. It's on the plinch on which he stood is where I shot that video. It's the exact same spot. So for me, it's fascinating to see all that. It hasn't changed, and every time I'm in the Fort Worth, Dallas area, I always take at least one trip over to Dealey. This time, over the course of a week, we were there 6 or 7 times. So.
And visit the 6th floor museum. It's a terrific museum. They've done an excellent job. Dallas at one point wanted to tear the Texas School Book Depository down. They did not want to remember what happened. Right. They were discriminated against for many years wrongly. 200,000 people showed up to cheer, and at most a few people, most of them with no Dallas roots, all of them with no Dallas roots, killed the president. But fortunately, the building was preserved, and there's a wonderful museum there full of interesting information that you will want to read and see.
One of the best museums I've ever visited. Their attention to detail is remarkable, and I respect what they've done.
And on that note, thank you very much for attending today's Public Square.
Thank you. Thanks, Don. Appreciate
Markus,
that.
Thank you very much. Dean, thank you. Appreciate it. Tune in next time when we have the 50th Public Square. Thank you.
Great.